We've been making this horror game, but it's still got one pretty big problem. It's not scary yet. So enough is enough. We've looked at a ton of cryptids and SCPs for ideas. Now all we need to do is design our own and code them into the game. Let's talk about what that was like. I'm Isaac.
I'm Gunnar.
I'm Preston.
And we're making For the Pit. In case you're new, here's a quick recap. You've joined a secret society that worships a horrifying pit in the ground named Elijah. The pit needs to be kept fed, so you're tasked with entering the woods and tracking down missing people. You'll find items littered about, and you have to figure out which ones belong to your target and which ones didn't. Then once you find your target, you knock them out and bring them back to home base while avoiding cryptid-like monsters. And actually, in a few short days, we're opening up very early playtesting for the game, so stick around to the end if you want to hear about that. We've made a ton of changes and additions to the game over the past month, so let's talk about the highlights, the lowlights, and what went into designing our first monsters. Starting with me! Last month I showed off the worm I modeled and got a lot of good feedback. Mainly, people pointed out that it was a bit generic. So I had the idea of giving the worm two big arms out of its sides. Then Preston had an alternate idea of giving the worm a single arm from out of its mouth. We asked a bunch of people to see what they preferred and it was super split, so we decided, why compromise? The people deserve both! When the sun's up, the worm will slowly drag itself using the single arm from its mouth, but once the sun sets, it'll swallow its own arm and grow two from its sides. I could not, however, figure out how to hide the extra arms that weren't in use, so they're just under the ground. I looked up a bunch of YouTube tutorials so I could learn how to rig, made the animations, and sent it off to Gunnar so he could be tortured by the AI. Of course, we wanted more monsters than just the worm. I had the idea early on of a spider so large that its legs would blend in amongst the trees. A bit of modeling work and I came out with this. It'll leave giant webs around the forest, and if you walk underneath it, well, you don't want to walk underneath it. We also figured it'd be nice to have some friendly critters, so I quickly modeled a deer and a rabbit. There's a lot more monsters on the way, but the spider and worm seemed like good starting points. Now on the detective side. In our last devlog, I talked about this paper prototype I made for the game. Well, it's been implemented. Now you can move items around and freely inspect each one for clues. As a reminder, the goal here is to sort through all the items you find and figure out which one belongs to the person you're tracking. And right off the bat, the system had no issues whatsoever and was absolutely perfect. There's a lot of complex systems I wrote up, over 70 pages of them, to determine the odds of which items generate and with which clues. This is great as it adds infinite replayability, but has the very big downside of sometimes generating a combination that's just impossible to decipher. You can get unlucky and end up with two items that both seem right, and therefore have to take a shot in the dark, which, when you get it wrong, just feels unfair. Our goal is this. If you investigate the items thoroughly, you'll be able to pick out the correct one every time. I've got a lot of ideas on how to help reach this goal, but we need to implement it first, so I'll talk about that in a future devlog. Now, if only there was a handsome programmer to talk about the other stuff we did.
In the last video, these were the tasks I sought out to complete, and luckily I actually got a good amount done. For the first, we fully converted the generation to the image format that I mentioned in the previous devlog. Also, instead of a giant wall at the world boundary, it is now a fence. Lastly, I tried making a way to add flat areas, and it worked, but it needs touching up, so it's not going to be in this devlog. Next was hideout and NPC function. I didn't get around to this, sadly. Next up, item tables were improved for each item, more items were added, and the inventory got another overhaul. Instead of the grid that we had before, you can now move around objects wherever you like, and you can double click an item to inspect it. The phone is now also accessible in the inventory. As before, we would open and close the backpack constantly just to open the phone and look at the target's information, but now you can do that in the backpack. And you now actually have to take pictures of the clues to get information about them. Items can have outlines based on different conditions, and attempting to link the item now has a cool build-up. Lastly, if you couldn't tell, a day-night cycle has been added. You start at noon, where it is gray and foggy, and go until midnight, where it becomes very, very dark. Now let's move on to enemies and AI. AI is tricky for two reasons. One, because the forest is randomly generated, I can't have navigation pre-baked. And two, Enemy AI is just hard in general. So my solution for navigation was to have raycasts all around the enemy that are used to check for obstacles. I was able to throw this on the target and he now runs away from the player, though he doesn't have any animation. Also, he can get stuck sometimes. We also threw in basic AI for the worm and got an animation for it crawling around. Isaac and I made a system that allows us to change the FPS on the animation. Currently we have it set at 24. The worm spawns at a random point in the forest when the last clue is found. He still has yet to have a body, but I do have an idea of how I could do that. Lastly, I want to mention that the game was switched from compatibility mode to Forward Plus mode. Vloggus had the same issue for his game, and his video helped us make the switch. Basically what this means is the old-end computers can't run the game, but we get better FPS, and we can use more features. Now for a good majority of you, this doesn't affect you at all. For reference, Buckshot Roulette was also made using Godot, and also uses Forward Plus. Wait, oh shit!
It's me, Preston. I'm back, recording a voiceover at midnight on a work night, and I've been learning Blender. Now, if you remember the last video, I said how I was using Crocotile, a low-poly modeling software. Why make the switch, you may think to yourself? Well, great question. It's mostly because there are more tutorials and active support for Blender. I think Crocotile is a great program, and I may end up flip-flopping between the two. I also just find it more useful to learn a couple of programs, just so I can figure out my favorite. Anyway, enough with the ramble. Back to learning new program. I started by learning to make this bob-omb. Isn't it neat? Anyways, after learning the basics came learning how to do UVs. What are UVs, you may ask? Well, they stand for, uncooperative textures or something like that. I don't know, I'm still new. So I started applying these base textures I made for our human model first. I have a separate texture for the head, body, hand, and legs to make the body parts modular. With modular models and textures, it will be easier to randomly generate our targets by enabling us to easily change shirt color, shirt design, flesh tone, facial expression, and etc. After some time learning UVs, like 3 days of trial and error, I was able to come up with this. Now, is it perfect? Please say yes, I'm so tired. Now with these newly gained skills, I can make better looking models and textures. And what was next on the to-do list, you ask? The tree spider. The tree spider has legs that look like trees. Duh. But look up and you'll see a large hairy body and many eyes. To make the hair of the tree spider more clear, I added a pattern of darker hair on the back of its abdomen. If you have any feedback for the spider or for any of these models at all I've worked on, let me know. I'm still very new to the medium and learning. Well, that's all for me. And I want you all to remember, goodbye!
Over the next month or so, we plan to add the tree spider to the game, update the hideout to feel much more alive, make a bunch of adjustments to the investigation mechanics, and add tools. Stuff like a flashlight, taser, fingerprint kit, gift shop pizza, and other stuff that'll help you to find your target and survive the woods. As for the stuff that's already in-game, we need to know if it's fun. So for all of our patrons of $10 or more, we're sending out an alpha build of the game in a couple short days. It's by no means perfect, but we need some early insight on what's working and what isn't. There's a bunch of other cool rewards too, so please check out our Patreon. Any amount helps us out. You can also join our Discord to chat with us. Link is in the description. A huge thank you to all of our Patreon supporters thus far, and a special shout out to Nized, thatguymc, Tibbers, and WatermelonZest. Thank you all.
And we'll see you soon.